Hello everyone friends, in this video I want to tell you how to write the very first layer of painting, which is called the underpainting. The underpainting serves as a kind of foundation for the painting. You could say a base, a groundwork, which allows us first of all to see how it will look on our canvas. Our task is to present this tonally, to break down all the parts in the painting. And in fact, this is the very first layer of painting, which is the most important. Look, usually one session is spent on the underpainting, and it's done rather roughly in terms of colors, but at least I try to make the underpainting quite accurate in terms of tonality. The most important thing, but what is tonality? It's the relationship between light and shadow, that is, this range from the lightest to the darkest. We need to lay out each area in its own tone. And I'll show you first of all which colors I use: ultramarine, blue, Mars, brown, dark and transparent. That means Leningrad natural umber, then English red, permanent red madder, this is light ochre I think, then pink madder, next cadmium red light, cadmium orange and cadmium yellow medium. So to start working, as you can see, I begin with the darkest areas. These are accordingly the hair in our painting, and for this I mix Leningrad natural umber. And to make it even darker I take blue. Be careful with the blue so it doesn't overpower all the other colors. After all, we still have mostly browns and crimson. I add brown and burgundy. It's better if they dominate rather than our umbers. And with this dark shade we start working on the darkest areas. To be continued. Next, once I have marked the darkest areas, they will serve as markers for us, allowing us to determine the relationship of slightly lighter colors relative to these dark ones. So we can already see the shadows on the face, especially where the forehead is and where there is a shadow under the hair. We are already adding lighter colors to those areas. For this, I add English red to this mixture. We get this kind of shade, a dark brown, which allows us to gradually transition to lighter areas. It also helps to add a bit of burgundy here, somewhere in the shades. Very often reds glow in the shadows, so don't forget to add them. Also, if we have a cooler shadow somewhere, we can add ultramarine. Now into this dark burgundy, the color will get a little bit dirtier, but again, just a little. But burgundy or brown should dominate, rather than blue. Although it can be different in different situations. So what's next for us? Next we start working with the skin, and so to move on to the skin, this brown color, I wipe it off the palette as much as possible. And now look, to mix our basic skin tone we usually use red. More precisely I use yellow and white. Here, since we start from the shadows, I skip white and use the brown already on the brush instead. Look, we've got one skin tone now, kinda brownish orange. We add more shades, some redder, some more burgundy, and we mix other tones into them. Maybe a bit more yellow somewhere. And here we can already add a little bit of white. So we need to make a working palette with different shades so that later we can quickly find the right color or mix it from the shades we already have here without thinking too much. So what do we get? We end up with many shades. Look, these are still mostly dark colors, but in portraits we often really lack them. As I see it, beginners mostly use reds with yellow, especially red. So don't forget that red is still the main color used for skin. Well, of course, along with yellow and white and so on. What are we missing here to show which colors are being used there? Look, the dark ones are more or less all here. I'll mix in some yellow, I'll add a shade. You can also add some blue to this mix, something a bit dirtier. And I also wipe the brush thoroughly. And now we're mixing. I just wiped the brush and I'm mixing it again from scratch. Yellow, red, what was left on the brush also mixes with the white. See, we get this pink color. We add a bit more yellow, but not to the whole mix, just next to it, so we keep the pink and mix it with the yellow. Now we get a skin tone mix, a medium shade. So, as you can see during the process, we're building up the tonality. At first, our underpainting should be done in a thin layer, very thin, so that later it can be easily adjusted, whether it's building up the tonality, the color, or correcting the shape. If we add texture, it will be hard to redo anything later because it will show through. And look, the most important thing for us right now in the underpainting, don't focus on details yet, they matter only at the end. For now, break everything down by tonal values. Identify darker and lighter areas. Look, for example, I've added darkness to the cheekbone and the side of the face on the left under the hair. I added color near the chin, found the forehead, and continued with more shades. And then more clearly, more precisely, I tried to build up the tonalities of the other parts. And gradually I approach those very places where it's not so easy to determine the tonality yet. What's the point? Look, what's difficult about painting a portrait, especially for a beginner, is getting that real volume that a person has. But this volume is achieved through light and shadow, the halftones. It's often not hard to find the light and shadow, both in color and tone, but it's the halftones themselves. Different shades that give small bends or concavities and convexities on the face. They are exactly what give the final resemblance. If you only roughen color and shadow without real midtones, you get a rough portrait. It may look similar, but true resemblance comes from the midtones, not the details. So we drew the lips, eyes, and nose to look similar, but it's those transitions on the skin that really show the shape of our face. Next, I started with the eyes because I left the shapes that I didn't understand, so I decided to do the eyes. And starting with the darkest color, again, that's our very first color that we mixed. That's our Leningrad Umber, natural plus madder lake, and a little bit of any blue, either light blue or ultramarine, and and then accordingly. I find the upper lash line and the pupil. The pupil should be pitch black. Let's move on. Starting with the pupil and the iris, it's darker at the top, much darker, and lighter at the bottom of the iris because it gets more light. And in our dark mix, there's even brown and blue, and we already start adding our bluish shades and so on. Next, I fill in the inner part of the eyeball. Don't forget that right now the light is interfering with us in the eyeball for the eyeball. There are a lot of shades, especially the pink one that you see here. And there's also a bit of blue for sure. These are the shades, plus there's also some brown here and there. So these are the kinds of shades we have, even some that are a bit burgundy in places. So we need to observe all these shades in the eyeballs, and by no means should we make them white. Don't forget that there's a shadow falling from above, and from below accordingly more light hits the eyeball. The eye corners typically show burgundy and pink tones, and the lower thickness of the eyelid is often light. It's some kind of pinkish, often even a purplish color. You can use some color, for example rose madder, along with the pink we use for the eyeball. Again, towards the corners of the eyes, everything gets darker, the eyeball and the thickness of the eyelid. And so let's move on. Next, I basically outline the eyebrows with a single stroke, and around the eyes I can already start to find the color in the shadow. When we have the center of the eye filled in, meaning the inner part of the eye, then we can already find the skin on the outside. Don't forget that under the eyebrow is the supraorbital ridge above the eyelashes, and it has a kind of spherical shape. That's why we shouldn't forget to make it darker below, above the eyelashes. Above that there's already a gradual transition to light, so we have this kind of roundness visible. Subtitles created by, subtitles created by, subtitles created by. These are the nuances that we have. I left to finish, I finished them. And again, look, I did the nose and lips quite roughly without going into details for the lips yet. I did almost the same thing, practically not even with a single stroke yet. And only then do I start refining it with a thin brush. In this case, for underpainting, basically a rough sketch, a rough laying in of color is always enough. But now at this stage, I've already started working more precisely with the underpainting just to save myself time in the future. Because when you already have some experience, you can basically make the underpainting more precise. You allow yourself to do that. But at the early stages, don't rush to try to make it very precise right away with the first layer. Well, first of all, paint goes onto a clean canvas more difficultly, not as evenly, not as smoothly. The transitions and everything else are harder to do. Secondly, it's very easy to make a mistake with the tones. I mean, I'm just so used to it now that I can already see these halftones more or less accurately. I sometimes make mistakes, but I correct them when reviewing the details. I already intentionally understand that if I make a mistake somewhere, it won't be hard for me to fix it. But still, in the initial stages, it's better not to rush into making a detailed underpainting. So, when I finished covering the whole face with color, I started refining the details with a thin brush. In some areas, I changed the tonality. For instance, I darkened the nasolabial triangles. All these halftones, all the different shades, I already use and take from our colors that were mixed, basically, from the very beginning. Also, most importantly, though that's just my taste, I really like adding red, especially burgundy shades, so that the face looks more lively with a healthy complexion, and to have fewer of those grey, dirty, brown or sickly tones in general, to make sure the face has a truly healthy color, not like what you often see in photos. So let's move on, let's go to the hair. Now that we already have the face, it's not so hard to determine what colors we need for the hair based on its tonality. And look, in general, with a big brush, I pretty much filled everything in with color. To be continued. And after I covered the hair with color, well, pretty roughly, just more or less showing the tonality, I use a soft brush. I think it's a Kolinsky brush. I soften the various transitions on the face so that, first of all, we don't have any excess paint, and secondly, all the transitions are smoother and there are no gaps anywhere. First of all, this allows us to work much more comfortably and easily in the next session when there won't be any texture anywhere. And secondly, when all the transitions are smooth, it will be easier to work. Again, this is for refinement in the future. All forms, even if initially inaccurate, are corrected with precise brush strokes, and nothing hinders this process. Alright, next I adjust the tonality a little bit again. Look, I corrected the chin a bit. Next we move on to the clothing. I don't think there will be any issues with the clothing. In this case we have a checkered shirt made up of several colors. I have a brush, I took a clean one. And I start with the very first ones. If the colors and tones are clear, you can start with any color. If they're complicated, unclear, or in shadow, it's better to begin with the darkest colors. In this case, I started with scarlet and red paint. Well, I took cadmium and red and marked out the areas with these markers, you could say, to outline the sections for myself. I took red and marked it out, these main bright spots, but again, look, don't forget the light in the shadow. I mark the brightest spots. Next, I start mixing with our browns. How do you do that? I think there won't be any problems here. So we take our scarlet color and mix it with brown. With brown, maybe with something burgundy. If it's too pure, we add a little bit of blue-brown and we get these kinds of shadow colors compared to our red. So I don't think there are any problems here. Next, the dark squares and rectangles I have there. This is the basis, Blue Football Club. Let's finish and put it here. And maroon crop block, you can also add brown here to slightly dirty the color of Blue Football Club. Very caustic, very bright, unnatural. If you use it in its pure form, it won't create any volume for you, meaning it will be very bright and will unnaturally draw too much attention to itself. Alright, let's move on. Well, I don't think there will be any problems with the clothes here. Naturally, I'm not adding any details yet, just laying down the main spots. Subtitles created by subtitry. Created, subtitles created. Next, we find the rest of the forms, the belly, in this case also the arm. Let's move on to the arm. Look, if you're doing your first session, it's better to work with the skin. At least it's just easier to do everything in one session, the arm and the face. Although, of course, it all depends on your skills and your style. But still, in one session, when you have all the colors mixed, then accordingly it's much easier and faster to build up all the areas where we have skin. So she first again started on the skin with the dark ones. One more thing, more precise tip for you. When you start working, whether it's a portrait, a landscape, or anything else, don't be afraid to go darker. When we start working on a white canvas, our eyes adjust to the white and all the colors seem much darker than they actually are. As a result, it ends up pale and flat. So don't be afraid to make everything much darker at first, because it's always much easier to lighten things up than to darken them. With experience, you'll find the right way. Subtitles created by subtitles created by subtitles created by. Here it is almost. It turned out gray, that is, we take blue and crap black, that's what I used, plus I mixed in a little bit of brown as well. Well, look, the point is that we're mixing. If you look at the color wheel, there are three opposite colors. If you look at the wheel as a triangle, you get burgundy, umber brown, and blue football club. And look, in this case, the shade turns out to be quite purplish. That means we have a little more burgundy and blue here. To remove the purple hue, we can add a little more brown. If brown starts to dominate, then we add the colors that are missing. In this case, maybe we need a bit more blue. As a result, we get this silvery color, which is easy to work with. Here the left side is shadier while the right side is brighter. These will be the future's building blocks. But of course, I'm not in a hurry to draw these building blocks right away. For now, I've just done the main fill, the tonal one, meaning light and shadow. Subtitles created, subtitles created. I hope this video was useful for you. This is the first part. Next, I'll be talking about the second session, how to work with the details, what to pay attention to, especially on the face. See you in the next video. Subtitles created by